Got it? Thumbs up. Here's the same strong hook translated into English for your YouTube video opening. Clapperboard English hook, opening line. Have you ever heard screams echoing from a house where no one lives? This rental home. Every night, chilling cries rang out, as if someone was being tortured inside. But not once had anyone ever seen a single person come out. The truth hidden within these walls will leave you frozen with fear. Backhand index pointing right, it's short, cinematic, and packed with suspense plus curiosity. Backhand index pointing right immediately sets the mood, so viewers must stay until the end to know what really happened. Do you also want to craft a mid-story CTA line in English, a natural spot to tell viewers to subscribe/comment, and an outro hook to tease your next story? Here's a polished YouTube true crime/ghost story script for your idea. Hashtag script, asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out, asterisk. /hook, they say the walls of this house hold secrets, because every night, neighbors heard the screams, but no one ever came out. /suspenseful setup. On the outside, it looked ordinary. A small rental on the edge of town, tucked behind uncut grass and peeling shutters. Young couples, small families, even college kids, all try to live here, but none of them stayed for long, because every tenant reported the same thing. The sound of blood-curdling screams, coming from inside the very house they lived in. Yet when they searched, the rooms were empty, the closets bare, and the basement locked. /build up. The first tenant claimed it was a prank, until the scream started at 3 a.m. every single night. High-pitched, female, terrified, as if someone was being attacked right under their feet. Another tenant swore they heard pounding, fists slamming against the walls, begging to be let out. But when police were called, they found nothing. No forced entry. No intruder. Just silence. Some even reported shadows moving across the hallway. Shadows that didn't match their own. Neighbors avoided the house altogether. One woman said she saw someone staring through the upstairs window on a night when the house was completely vacant. /mid-story CTA. If you're hooked already, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more chilling stories like this. /main climax. It wasn't until years later that the truth began to surface. Records revealed that in the late 1970s, a woman was held captive inside that very house. For weeks, her screams echoed into the night, but no one called for help. Some say what neighbors hear now are echoes of her final nights. Others believe it's something far darker, something that refuses to leave. /cliffhanger ending. Because just last year, a new tenant moved in, and on her very first night, she claimed she heard a voice whisper her name from inside the locked basement. To be continued. Perfect. Let's continue seamlessly with part 2 of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out, star. Hashtag script. Part 2, the basement door. /hook. The new tenant swore she heard her name whisper from behind the locked basement door. But when she found the key, what she uncovered was far worse than anyone expected. /suspenseful setup. For days, she ignored it. The whispers, the scratching on the basement door, even the sound of footsteps pacing in the middle of the night. But curiosity and fear grew stronger. Finally, she found an old, rusted key taped beneath the kitchen sink. It fit the basement lock. And the moment she turned it, the house went silent. /build up. Step by step, she descended into the darkness. The air was heavy, damp, and foul, as if the walls themselves were rotting. At the bottom, she found a single chair, straps still bolted to its arms, and carved into the cement floor were claw marks, deep, jagged, endless. She called the landlord the next morning. But here's the thing, the landlord claimed there was no basement. /mid-story CTA. If this story already has you looking over your shoulder, hit that subscribe button so you never miss what comes next. /main climax. Disturbed, the tenant asked the neighbors about the house. One old man finally spoke. He remembered the woman who vanished there in 1978. A woman held captive for nearly a month. She was never found, and he claimed the basement, the same one she swore she entered, had been sealed decades ago, buried under concrete. No one had been down there since. Yet the tenant had seen it. She had touched the chair. She had heard the voice. Cliffhanger ending. The following week, she tried to show investigators the basement door. But when they arrived, the wall where the door had been was solid brick, and on that wall, scratched deep into the surface, was her own name, to be continued. Got it. Here's part 3 of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out, star. #script, part 3, the missing woman returns. /hook, her name was carved into the bricks where the basement door used to be, but what the investigators found next proves the missing woman may have never left. /suspenseful setup. Police dismissed her story. They claimed she was hallucinating, but the scratches on the wall, deep, frantic, fresh, were undeniable. The tenant, now terrified, refused to sleep alone. Every night, she swore she heard the same whisper, the same name, always from the spot where the basement door had once been. /build up. Determined to prove she wasn't losing her mind, she began digging. She uncovered old case files. The woman who vanished in 1978. Her name was Eleanor Price. The official report said Eleanor was last seen entering the rental house. She was never seen again. But one detail chilled her blood. Eleanor had been 26 years old, the exact same age as the tenant now. Neighbors began avoiding her. One even slipped a note under her door that read, "Get out while you still can. She chooses women who look like her." /midstory CTA. If this story has your heart racing, hit subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of this haunting. /main climax. Late one night, the tenant recorded her living room with her phone at 3:12 a.m., the exact time neighbors once heard the screams. The video captured a faint figure standing in the corner, long hair, torn dress, face hidden. When she turned on the lights, nothing, but in the recording, the figure remained, and it was staring directly at her. The next morning, she found something outside her bedroom door, a photograph, old, faded, of Eleanor Price. /cliffhanger ending, scrawled on the back of the photo, in shaky, jagged handwriting, were 3 words. "Let me out." To be continued. Perfect. Here's part 4 of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out, star. #script, part 4, let me out. /hook. The photograph of Eleanor Price had just 3 words scrawled on the back, "Let me out." But when the tenant tried, something else answered. /suspenseful setup. The tenant couldn't sleep. She kept the photo on her nightstand, staring at Eleanor's faded eyes. Whispers filled the house again. Only now, they weren't just calling her name. They were begging, pleading, screaming. And one night, the whispers changed. A deeper voice cut through the noise. A man's voice. And it didn't say, "Let me out." It said, "Don't." /build up. Terrified, she reached out to a local historian. He confirmed what police had buried for decades. Eleanor hadn't been the only woman to vanish near that house. 3 others had gone missing in the years before, all in their 20s, all with similar features. The basement had been more than just a prison. It had been a hunting ground. The historian revealed one final detail. The man who once owned the house was never caught. He simply vanished. Some say he still walks the halls. /midstory CTA. If this story has you hooked, subscribe now so you never miss the next chilling twist. /main climax. That night, the tenant gathered the courage to confront the wall where the basement door once stood. She pressed her ear against the bricks. At first, silence, then a faint knock, followed by a woman's sobs. She whispered Eleanor, and the knocking grew violent. Suddenly, the deep man's voice thundered from inside the wall. "She's mine." /cliffhanger ending. The lights in the house exploded, and when darkness swallowed the room, She felt cold fingers wrap around her ankle. To be continued. All right, here's part 5 of Asterisk. The rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. Hashtag script. Part 5. She's mine. /hook. Cold fingers gripped her ankle in the dark, and when she looked down, what she saw was not human. /suspenseful setup. The tenant screamed, kicking free. Her phone light flicked on just long enough to reveal the marks. Handprints. But they weren't fresh. They were charred black, as if burned into her skin. She bolted from the house and never returned that night. But running wasn't enough, because no matter where she went, the whispers followed. /build up. Desperate, she contacted a local journalist who had investigated cold cases tied to property. The journalist confirmed her worst fears. Every tenant who reported screams, every person who left the house in fear, claimed the same thing afterward. The whispers stayed with them, and then their lives fell apart. Accidents, illness, madness, as if the house itself marked them. The journalist slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, crime scene images from 1978, a broken chair, blood smeared across the basement floor, and one final image, a shadowy figure captured in the corner, too tall, too thin, watching. /midstory CTA. If you've made it this far, you're as hooked as I am. Subscribe now, so you don't miss what's waiting in that basement. /main climax. The journalist confessed something he'd never printed. A rumor whispered by the last detective on the case, that the man who once owned the house never vanished at all. He was buried there, inside the walls. And if the voices were right, he wasn't alone. /cliffhanger ending. The tenant returned one final time with the journalist. Together, they stood before the brick wall. And as the camera on his recorder clicked on, a woman's voice filled the room. Broken, weeping. Help me? Then came the man's voice, closer than ever. Asterisk. She's mine. And now, so are you? Asterisk. To be continued. Here we go. Part 6 of Asterisk. The rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. Hashtag script. Part 6. Inside the walls. /hook. The journalist recorder picked up two voices, one begging for help, the other claiming ownership. But what they discovered inside the walls changed everything. /suspenseful setup. The tenant wanted to run. The journalist wanted proof. And so, against every warning, they brought in a crew to tear open the brick wall. Neighbors gathered outside, watching nervously. Everyone had heard the stories. No one expected what came next. /build up. The first sledgehammer strike echoed like thunder. Bricks crumbled to dust. Behind the wall wasn't solid earth, but narrow passage, swallowed in black. The smell hit them first. Rot, rust, and something sweet like decay. The crew hesitated, but the journalist pushed forward with his camera. They found bones, dozens of them, women's shoes, shredded dresses, all stacked like forgotten memories. And deeper in the passage, a body still intact. /midstory CTA. If you're still with me, subscribe right now, because what about to happen inside that hidden chamber is darker than anything we've seen yet. /main climax. The body belonged to a man, tall, gaunt, his jaw locked open in a silent scream. But here's the thing, his fingernails were worn to the bone, as if he hadn't died peacefully, as if something had kept him there. The journalist whispered, "This must have been the owner." Suddenly, the camera went dead. The crew's lights flickered, and from behind the pile of bones, a figure stepped forward. /cliffhanger ending. It wasn't Eleanor. It wasn't any of the women. It was him, the man who was supposed to be dead. And with a voice like gravel scraping stone, he whispered, Asterisk, I told you she's mine. Asterisk, to be continued. Here's part 7 of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. Hashtag script, part 7, the man in the walls. Backslash hook. They thought the body in the wall belonged to the killer, but when it stood up, they realized something far worse. Backslash suspenseful setup. The crew dropped their tools and ran. The tenant froze in place. The journalist kept filming, even as the figure's shadow stretched unnaturally long across the chamber. The body's skin hung loose. Its eyes were hollow sockets. And yet it moved, not like a man, like a puppet. Backslash build up. The tenant whispered Eleanor's name. Instantly, the figure twitched. Its head jerked toward her with a sickening crack. And then a woman's scream exploded from its mouth. Not his voice. Hers. The walls shook. Bones tumbled to the floor. The sound was deafening, as if every missing woman was screaming at once. The journalist grabbed the tenant's arm. "We have to go." But the figure stepped closer, dragging itself across the floor. With every step, it hissed the same words. Asterisk, she's mine. She's mine. She's mine. Asterisk. Backslash mid-story CTA. If this has you chilled to the bone, subscribe now. The darkest part of the story is only just beginning. Backslash main climax. They bolted for the stairs. But when they reached the top, the basement door slammed shut. The crew outside pounded against it, but it wouldn't budge. Inside, the tenant dropped to her knees. She could hear Eleanor's voice, faint but clear, right next to her ear. Asterisk, don't let him take me again. Asterisk, the figure lunged. The journalist swung his camera like a weapon, and in that instant, the tenant made a choice. She screamed back into the dark. Asterisk, take me instead. Asterisk. Backslash cliffhanger ending. The figure froze. Silence swallowed the room. And then, slowly its head turned, and it smiled. To be continued. Here we go. Part 8 of Asterisk. The rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. Hashtag script. Part 8. Take me instead. Backslash hook. She offered herself to the thing in the basement, and when it smiled, the nightmare truly began. Backslash suspenseful setup. The journalist shouted at her, begged her to stop, but the tenant stood frozen, her eyes locked on the figure. It raised one bony hand, and with a slow, deliberate motion, it pointed directly at her chest. Then, every light in the house went out. Backslash build up. In the pitch black, screams echoed. Not hers, not the journalist's. Eleanor's. The voice begged, sobbed, and finally shrieked. Asterisk, don't let him in. Asterisk. The tenant felt her chest tighten, as if invisible hands were crushing her ribs. She gasped for air. The journalist swung his flashlight wildly until its beam landed on her face. Her pupils had blown wide, her lips trembled, and a voice that was not her own slipped out. Asterisk, she belongs to me now. Asterisk. Backslash mid-story CTA. If you're still watching, you're braver than most. Subscribe now, because the darkest chapter of this haunting is still ahead. Backslash main climax. The journalist grabbed her shoulders, shaking her. Fight it. Don't let him in. But when she looked at him, it wasn't her eyes staring back. It was his, the killer's. Her mouth curled into a grin that wasn't hers. And in that deep, gravel-soaked voice, she whispered, Asterisk, I've been waiting for a new vessel. Asterisk, the walls cracked. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the pile of bones in the basement began to rattle, rising one by one as if they were being summoned. Backslash cliffhanger ending. The tenant's body collapsed to the ground, but when she lifted her head, her eyes burned with something ancient, something evil, and the journalist realized too late. He hadn't been documenting a haunting. He'd just witnessed a possession. To be continued. All right, here's part 9 of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. Hashtag script. Part 9, the vessel. Backslash hook. She collapsed to the ground, but when she raised her head, it wasn't her anymore. It was him. Backslash suspenseful setup. The journalist staggered back, camera shaking in his hands. The tenant's body twitched, her movements unnatural, jerky, like strings were pulling her from above. She looked at him with hollow, blackened eyes, and in that guttural, ruined voice, she said, Asterisk, you shouldn't have opened the wall. Asterisk, build up. He tried to run for the stairs, but the door still wouldn't budge. Behind him, bones clattered across the floor, pulled by an unseen force toward her. The tenant's arms bent at impossible angles. Her skin stretched and split. It was as if the killer's spirit was sewing itself into her body. But then, another voice broke through. Softer, desperate. It was Eleanor. Asterisk, don't leave me here. Please. Asterisk, the journalist froze. Eleanor wasn't begging for life. She was begging for release. /midstory CTA. If your pulse is racing, make sure you're subscribed, because what comes next decides whether she lives or becomes something far worse. /main climax. The tenant lunged. He pinned her down, screaming her name, begging her to fight. And for a split second, her eyes flickered. Her voice came back. Help me? But then the darkness swallowed her again. Her mouth opened wide, far wider than humanly possible. And from the abyss inside her throat, the killer's voice roared. Asterisk, this body is mine. Asterisk. The walls shook violently. The foundation groaned. It felt like the entire house would collapse. /cliffhanger ending. The journalist realized there was only one choice. If he wanted to save her, he'd have to destroy the house. But when he reached for the gasoline canisters left behind by the crew, he saw something carved into the floorboards beneath his feet. Fresh words. Scratch deep. Asterisk, burn it and she burns too. Asterisk, to be continued. Perfect. We'll start steering this arc toward its final climax while keeping the suspense high. Here's part 10 of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. #script. Part 10, burn it all. /ook. The floorboards whispered a warning. Burn it. And she burns too. But the journalist knew. If he didn't act soon, the house would claim them both. /suspenseful setup. The tenant's body was no longer hers. She moved with the rage of something ancient, dragging herself across the floor, bones rattling around her like armor. Eleanor's voice cried out through the chaos, sometimes pleading, sometimes screaming, and sometimes begging him not to let her suffer any longer. The journalist's hands shook as he clutched the gasoline canister. Was he about to kill the only innocent soul still trapped in the house? Or finally put an end to decades of torment? /build up. He doused the walls, the furniture, the stairs. The tenant, no, the thing inside her, laughed. A deep, rasping laugh that echoed through the chamber. Asterisk, do it. Burn her. Burn them all. You'll never know which one is real. Asterisk. For a moment, he faltered. And in that moment, her hand shot out, clawing across his arm. The burn marks from before now spread to him, black, blistering, impossible to ignore. But then her eyes flickered again, her true self breaking through for just one heartbeat. She whispered his name, not the killer's voice, not Eleanor's, her own. /midstory CTA. If you followed the story all the way here, make sure you're subscribed, because we're entering the end game now. /main climax. He struck the match. The flames caught instantly, racing up the gasoline-soaked wood. The house groaned like it was alive, every wall screaming as fire spread. The tenant convulsed, thrashing, caught between the killer's grip and Eleanor's desperate spirit. Her mouth opened in a howl that split into two voices. Asterisk, save me. Asterisk, asterisk, she's mine. Asterisk. The journalist dragged her toward the stairs, flames chasing them both. The house rained fire and plaster, the bones collapsing back into dust. But then the door at the top of the stairs swung open on its own, for the first time in years. /cliffhanger ending. He shoved her through it, coughing in the smoke. But as he turned back for one final look, he saw her, Eleanor, standing at the bottom of the burning basement stairs, watching him, smiling. Thank you, she whispered, before the fire swallowed her whole. To be continued. Got it. Here's the final episode of Asterisk, the rental house where screams were heard, but no one ever came out. Asterisk. Hashtag script. Final chapter. The ashes. /hook. The house was gone, but in the ashes, the scream still lingered. /suspenseful setup. By dawn, firefighters had reduced the cursed rental to a smoldering ruin. Black smoke curled into the sky, carrying with it decades of secrets. The tenant survived. Barely. She was pulled from the flames unconscious, her skin scarred, but her eyes were finally her own. The journalist lay beside her in the hospital, camera destroyed, recordings lost, all except for one fragment. A single voice captured in the chaos of fire, whispering, thank you, build up. Authorities searched the rubble for days. They found bones, yes, dozens of them, but no trace of the man who had haunted the basement walls. Some swore his body had burned to ash. Others believed his spirit simply moved on to find another home. The tenant left town soon after. She never spoke publicly about what happened. She never rented again. And she never walked near that neighborhood. The journalist wrote his story, but no outlet dared to print it. Too unbelievable. Too terrifying. Too real. /mid-story reflection. For years, people wondered if the haunting ended with a fire, or if destroying a house only set something darker free. /main climax. Then, months later, a new development was announced. On the very lot where the house once stood, workers began pouring the foundation for fresh homes. And when the concrete dried, construction crews noticed something. Deep cracks spreading across the surface. Cracks that, when looked at closely, formed words. 2 words, carved into the foundation itself. Let me out. /ending. The house may be gone, but its story will never rest. Because some places aren't haunted by ghosts. They're haunted by the truth. And no fire, no wall, no silence can bury that forever. The end.